Welcome back to Media Week. Well, Charmaine Muldrich joined the Outdoor Media Association back in 2010 with a raft of experience after beginning her media career in Adelaide and taking her first management position at age 24, working as a station manager of a public radio station. The outdoor advertising industry, though, to her, is not just part of the media mix, but also a very important part of a vibrant city. Well, for more on the fast-growing revenues of the sector and the strategy moving forward, we're joined now by Charmaine Muldrich in the studio. Charmaine, great to have your company on the show today.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
So you have 32 members of the Outdoor Media Association, including the Big Four. Are all of them, would you say, in boom times with the industry?
So some of our members are ancillary to outdoor media display members. And yes, I think, you know, with the kind of growth that we've had, no one's being left behind, which is a good thing, always.
No, I think you represent about 90% of the market.
Yes.
What's wrong with the other 10%? Why aren't they on board?
I don't know. You'll have to ask them.
Are there any big players there? You've got most of it stitched up.
We've got most of the big players stitched up, but yeah, there are some other players out there that could join the association.
Yeah. And they must be, I mean, they must be pretty happy with the job you're doing, because it's all comes back to financial performance, I guess. If they're all, you know, writing lots of inventory, selling lots of inventory, writing lots of invoices, making lots of profits, they're happy with you guys?
Well,
scenario?
I'd love to take all of the credit, of course, for
you can bask in it, though, can't you?
How well the industry is doing. I think some of it is, you know, being in the right place at the right time. You know, I arrived just as Move was launched. I arrived when the industry had really come together to put Move into place, and then we've built from that. And I think it's a really great working relationship with the industry association and the operators, and I think that's part of the success. We work very well together.
Well, speaking of that success, 2014 was actually the most successful year to date for out-of-home industry. Can there be much more room for growth from here then, in your view? Absolutely.
So 2014, we grew by 10%. The first quarter of 2015, we've got 12.5% growth. And what we are looking at is to be at about $1 billion in revenue by 2018. So we're quite aspirational.
Wow.
And we can't see why not.
Okay. Where are you taking the money from in terms of the other sectors? Because obviously, you know...
We talk a lot on the show about traditional media being under pressure, having trouble making their figures year to year, growth's down. Are you stealing some of their sort of...
I'm not sure whether we're stealing anyone's growth. You know, I think in the media industry, and I think Victor talked about that, things change rapidly. One year you're up, one year you're down. What we have done is steadily, I think in the last 5 years, grown our market share. So some of it is growth because there's more inventory, we've digitised inventory, and some of it is market share growth. So if you're using the CISA figures, which is usually the industry benchmark, we're at 5.2, and we're probably the only, well, not probably, we are the only traditional media channel that has steadily grown over the last 5 years.
Just looking at the numbers more closely, I mean, digital outdoor revenues in 2014 accounted for 18.8% of total revenue. I mean, that's up from 11.3% in 2013. Has been finding those funds to invest in digital been a bit of a challenge for your members, or are the benefits, you know, good enough to quickly repay that investment?
Yeah, I think it's that thing about future-proofing your industry. I think one of the things that I think the outdoor industry is very good at is not just keeping abreast but looking forward. And I think Move was the first big forward move, and it paid off in spades. So keeping abreast of digital technology is really important. Not that I see the industry being completely digitised. There's always going to be a place for static, and our static revenues are also growing. So it's not just, you know, we have to digitise in order to grow. Static is also growing at a similar rate to digital.
We heard from Anthony Fitzgerald and then Victor today. They both talked a little bit about programmatic and the impact it's having on their businesses and the necessity to be there. What's happening in outdoor in that space? Is that something you've got to get on top of?
Well, outdoor is slightly different to the other media channels because it's not, you know, you're not sending one program to to an audience across Australia. Each outdoor face attracts a different audience. So what we are doing though is we are looking at automation. So we've just launched an expression of interest to build an automated transactional platform. So we won't start by trading, because you can't really trade outdoor in the same way as you can trade online. But we will be looking at amalgamating the whole industry under one hub where people can buy and sell regardless of whether that inventory is covered by Move.
But for members only, right? So that other 10% have got to get on board, do they?
I'm glad you made that leap of faith there, James. Well done.
All right, Charmaine, we might leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you very much.
Charmaine Muldrich there. Well, moving on to something else we've been watching this week, and that's Prime Minister Tony Abbott coming under a bit of fire over proposed reform to media laws, with reports that changes to media ownership have in fact been taken off the table. The Australian was reporting Cabinet has decided against the move in order to avoid a fight with the main players. Well, for more on this and the broader landscape, we're joined now by Evan Lucas from IG. Evan, what do you make of this chatter? Because the reforms being off the table, which media stocks in particular would that impact?
It actually positive and negative impact almost across the entire media space. I think if you look negatively, there's no doubt that Nine, Win, you could probably also somewhat throw in there Prime, but also Southern Cross are the biggest losers, along with Channel 10. The reaction when this sort of news dropped, it was quite strong. You've seen a really, really big pullback in 10's share price. It also possibly puts under sort of slight scrutiny maybe the ACCC coming into that deal we saw with Foxtel last week, where they took a 15% stake in 10 as well. So they're the losers. The winner, with a clear dot, and the market's telling you that, is obviously 7. Kerry Stokes very much has been very prominent in the idea that this, scrapping of the reach rule would be detrimental to the industry, which realistically means it's detrimental to 7. And they were the only one to actually see a positive reaction on their share price, considering the negativeness that came out with it. So it is possibly a game changer. A lot of M&A, a lot of strategy had been positioned around the idea that this was going to be done inside the 3 years of the coalition being in power. And now, as you've already alluded to, it looks like it's going to be put on the back burner. It certainly isn't a federal issue that is really making any sort of vote turners, and that's why it's been put there. So if it is certainly seen that way, the market's clearly telling you it's a negative for the whole space.
At least for the time being. Ev, a lot of talk as well, continuing from analysts on that Nine Entertainment downgrade last week, and talk that it's operational, not in fact cyclical, which is what they sort of had us to believe.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. This is becoming more structural rather than obviously what it was, which is cyclical. And it does start at 9, but they are certainly pushing it out, not just to 9, but to 7 and 10 as well. And there's some clear stats that are backing that. There was an expectation that basically by 2035, that the current media spending on traditional media, being print and TV, sits at 63. That was going to fall to 37. Of that, currently around about 27% goes to free-to-air TV, fall to 24. And that's the structural change, and your previous guess obviously is also part of that in terms of how that movement is. That's a big movement, and that's a structural change away from the current media advertisement. It's away from the current dollars that are generated by that, and that is where that headwind is. This is not just a cyclical second half of the year going into the back end of when they have winter programming. This looks more a longer term issue, and it's not just Nine they're alluding to. This is free to air as a whole, and there is structural headwinds over the next 2 decades.
Well, that's the thing, because we heard from Seven West and they confirmed their guidance. Do you expect to see anyone come out and perhaps downgrade from here on?
Possibly not, and the reason for it is that we are so close to the end of financial year that it probably won't happen. You would have heard it by now. That doesn't mean, however, that come FY16-17 you're not going to see those structural headwinds coming to the fore, and I think that's more the prominent thing. 7 very clearly on the front foot, FY15 is fine. But they haven't talked to us about FY16, and I think that's more the key point. Structurally, 7 is weaker at the back half of a calendar year than 9, where the traditional sort of AFL viewership really falls off. That will be the interesting thing, is the programming they generate to keep their viewership up, to keep the advertisement dollars coming in.
All right, Evan, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks, Ingrid.
Evan Lucas there from IG with a stock market perspective on the media space. Now, on those media reforms Evan was just speaking about, and reports today, of course, they've been taken, well, this week they've been taken off the table. We actually heard from Malcolm Turnbull a little earlier in the week on those potential reforms. He spoke with Sky News political editor David Spears on Agenda. Here's a bit of what he had to say.
From my point of view, the more diversity, the richer and more diverse the media offering available for Australians, the better. That's one.
There's Malcolm Turnbull there just basically saying the more sort of, freedom the better. What do you make of those comments from Mr Turnbull? And then, of course, news and reports that perhaps the media reforms have been taken off the table, James.
Well, you get the feeling Mr Turnbull would like to see some reform, but then at the same time he explained to David Spears that, look, we've always said we really wanted industry unanimity on it, I guess, and we certainly haven't got that, as Evan explained, the effect on the shares, some media stocks went up on this news, others went down, so there's real different interests from the different media owners.
But do you agree there's got to be some sort of change? A lot of these reforms, obviously, or a lot of these, policies were in place before, these regulations were in place before the internet even existed.
It doesn't really matter what we think, does it? I mean, we've been saying for a long time they should change, but it's just beginning to... just looks like they won't.
But the debate won't be off the table for long, surely. I mean, these are big players that want to see it change.
It could be off till the next election. I mean, was there an election next year? I'm not sure. I think there might be. But so a lot of people will be in re-election mode, and they're certainly wary of media owners, perhaps, pushing a story to their consumers. Look, the government's acting not in their interest, so the government doesn't really want to upset anybody in the lead up to the next election. So, OK, if it restarts again after the next election, what's going to change? I think maybe the media industry is going to have to be a bit more united. We heard from Anthony Maiden when he was on the show from Astra saying, well, it's a bit unusual, isn't it, to have to expect the industry to get their act together before the legislation will change. But I think that's the thing that's really going to have to change before we see some action.
Yeah, Andrew Maiden's certainly been big on it. But anti-siphoning and REACH, that's the main sort of two regulations that everyone's looking at, right?
Yeah, and the voices, a 2 out of 3 rule, I guess, in the one market. But anti-siphoning, it's really hard to see that. They might manipulate it a little bit, but what's that going to change? I mean, that's why this Foxtel 10 deal, there's nothing stopping Foxtel making a massive knockout bid for the AFL now and managing the free-to-air component of that, giving that to 10, and maybe Telstra coming in as a partner too.
All right, there you have it. Well, let's take a quick break on Media Week. When we come back, we'll check in on the ratings for week 24, plus why Chris Bath has stepped away from 7. Details on that next.